Hey everybody, RPG Guy here with another episode of RPG Guy Talks. Since the series has actually got a good reception with the Final Fantasy so far, I thought I'd do another discussion about an RPG game that is needs to be given more light. I think it needs to be talked about more, and it's a shame it's not being talked about more even to this day, because it's really not that old. Well, it's old. It's really old. But it's also not that forgotten in many circles because it keeps coming back. And I made a comment in the other, at certain points in the Final Fantasy play, so this is going to be why we should talk about it here. We're going to talk about the Lunar series. Now, for those of you who don't know what Lunar is an RPG that was mostly exclusive to Sega for the longest time. And it was so unknown on its release because it was so exclusive because it came out on Sega CD in 92 I think, and in Japan, and it was actually the highest selling game in Japan on the Sega CD, or their Master CD, and it was the second highest selling game on the North American Sega CD release, which is like a big deal. So this was a good game. It's one of the number one games to come out on Sega, and the only time another RPG game came out and beat out Lunar was surprisingly Shining Force 2, but that was a Sega Genesis game as opposed to a Sega CD game. So Lunar, the series, what do we say about it? It's literally the most remade game franchise in existence. It's been remade more times than Wolfenstein. It's been remade more times than any Final Fantasy game, almost 2 or 3 times over. It's worth talking about. Why is it remade all the time? Why do they keep bringing it back? What is so amazing about Lunar that it has to be keeping remade and expanded upon? So we're going to talk about Lunar. So hold on to your butts for a big ride of Lunar. And we're going to start from the beginning. Everything starts in the beginning. So Lunar. How do we talk about Lunar the Silver Star? This is the one that most people actually haven't played, even though it sold a lot back in ye olden times and whatnot. Sega CD, for every person that owned a Sega, there was, out of about 30 people who owned a Sega, one of them had a Sega CD. And I was introduced through Lunar through the Sega CD. And Eternal Blue, which is Lunar's sequel on Sega CD as well. Lunar is a story. Many people, if you were to play it today, the original Lunar Silver Star, you would feel that's a little dated for its time, but it was definitely a good Sega CD game, utilizing a lot of what the Sega CD had to offer. But, and it had voice acting, which was moderate. It wasn't phenomenal. But what did it do? What did it do right? Lunar as a story, we'll talk about. I'm just gonna power through the Sega CD ones because those are not the most famous Lunar. There's a remake of it that's more famous than that, and that's where I'll talk about characters and story and stuff. But Lunar, as a story and just in general, is a well-made, well thought out game. Here's the thing: it doesn't do anything that innovative. Even by today's standards, it's not innovative. Even back then, it wasn't that innovative as far as what the story entailed. So what made it so great was that it did everything right. It's one of the few games where I actually will say it did everything right as far as story goes. The storytelling in Lunar is arguably one of the best stories ever told as far as how it's being told, the way that it's being told through the characters, the way that the villain behaves, the story in and itself. What people sometimes forget, and even myself, so I can take a step back from saying it's the greatest story ever written. It's not that it's that. It's that when you take a story apart and you look at it and you try to look at it in like chapters and in variable climaxes that happen between story events and where the story's direction is going, it's fundamentally sound. It's universally fundamentally sound. It's incredibly solid, but it's not doing anything amazing. It's not trying to do anything new. And so when you don't do anything new or innovative, you have less chances of error because it's been done so many times correctly. And in a sense, that's what they did with Lunar. You know, they made a game with a story that had almost no plot holes. I mean, there's plot holes in everything, but no major plot holes. It had characters that were relatable on almost every level. From, you know, your child, from a child seeking to become a great hero, who looked up to a point of heroism and actually undertaking a quest that is like in an Earthbound sense. It helps him grow past his childhood fantasy of being a hero to see what it really takes to do it. You meet characters who are older than this character. You meet characters that are younger than this character. You meet characters that are arrogant, that learn how to adapt to a world where arrogancy is not what really helps people. There's a lot of variables, and it's a big thing to talk about. And we'll talk about it when we get to the first remake, because that's where they kind of completed it. Now, with Lunar Silver Star, to say that it was very complete as a storyline is a pretty impressive thing to fucking say in 1992. Its story was so intricate. In other words, it was very detailed in what was going on at times, that for what it was doing and the story that it was trying to tell, it was well structured. And, you know, it was just much better. It was structured far beyond anything Final Fantasies had ever done. It was structured, and I'm saying that this game was so well structured that it stood up to even today's storytelling, and it still does, which is why it keeps getting remade and why people keep buying it and playing it. It's because it's, you know, like the Lord of the Rings, or like the Wizard of Earthsea, or like, I guess, some of the Margaret and Weiss Dragonlance books. They continue to be read, because if it's a good fucking story, people will go and keep reading it. It'll get republished again and again and again with personal little tweaks, and it'll do well. It'll flourish. It'll be great. And this is one thing I hate to say that in a lot of Final Fantasy games never really got to do, except maybe Final Fantasy IV. So if you're wondering why I say that Final Fantasy IV may have been one of the best Final Fantasies, it's because of its story. It's because of how it was structured. And Lunar, which came out the same year as Final Fantasy II, there's something to consider, or Final Fantasy IV rather, there's something to consider about this. It's good storytelling. And because the storytelling is good, you don't have to do much to it except update it a little bit, visually, audioly, and slap the name on the box and send it back out. Because a whole new generation will get to enjoy it. So, Lunar, the Silver Star, visually was Sega CD's, was good with Sega CD. It did really well. It had cutscene, some slightly animated cutscenes. I think they were mostly stills, but there was some animation to them, and it wasn't phenomenal by today's standards, but it's good, and many of those things. So they made a sequel literally like 2 years later called Lunar Eternal Blue, which also came out on the Sega CD, and it was visually a little better, audibly a little better, but I don't think it was extraordinary. Now, the story was, again, very solid. It was still very solid. However, some people would argue that there were issues with some of the drama and some of the ways things played out. So those are the two Lunar games. Now, we're going to jump ahead a little bit in the series just so I can actually start talking about Lunar. The one release that most people know of, that most people hold in the highest respect, is Lunar the Silver Star Story Complete. This game came out in Japan around 2006-ish, and it only came out in Japan on Sega Saturn. It never came out to the US. Okay, so this is the game, this is the remake, a literal remake with animated visuals. It had the animated cutscenes and of anime style cutscenes, not just, Sega CD graphics. They really renewed it from the bottom up. Better audio, everything better. Everything upgraded to Sega Saturn standards and later to PlayStation standards. And what you need to consider about this is that this game was remade a lot from here. Just this version of the game. Okay, so you have now a Sega CD version, you have a Sega Saturn version, you have a PlayStation version, you have a Windows version, and you have a Mac version that came out like a couple years ago. That's actually doing moderately well in Japan. There was a Game Boy Advance rewriting version, so they changed a lot of game details in it. It wasn't very good. It wasn't as well received. And then there was a bundle version that came out in Japan on PlayStation 2 as well. And that's a very rare disc. I've been trying to get it for years, and I saw it once on eBay for like $7,000, and I was like, yeah, I ain't buying that. So it comes, I think, with Albert Odyssey or something else Game Arts released. No, Sunsoft released Albert Odyssey, Legend of Etrian or whatever. It came out with another game made by Game Arts, and it wasn't Grandia either. It might have been Grandia. Maybe it was Parallel Trippers or something. But anyway, so what is Lunar all about? What is the big deal with Lunar, the Silver Star story complete? So, as you see, I jumped from Lunar and the Silver Star and Lunar Tree to Blue because the same things are going to apply in Lunar, the Silver Star story complete. It's the same story. Not much has changed as far as the gameplay and the world in and itself. So, we have this game, which is that, like I said earlier, it's a story that's universally complete. As far as the storyline goes, you had a really strong story. It's a story about a boy named Alex. Alex, oh Alex, and that's the damn fucking cat. Oh god, we'll get to the cat in a minute, or is it? Alex as a protagonist, the main protagonist of our story, he is a young boy who dreams of becoming a great hero, and this hero is a hero that's existed before him, which is a Dragon Master Dyne, and he seeks to be like his role model. And for him, that's the biggest thing in the world for him. He wants to be like Dragon Master Dyne. He wants to be a hero and go on adventures and so on and so forth. Okay, the first opening scene of the game, you sit there and go, I can't believe I'm playing this. This is so corny. And that voice that cat said was so annoying. The flying cat. But yeah, ultimately that's what he sets out to do. And along the way, he involves his childhood friend Luna. And she's pretty. She's got the blue hair, if you've seen the cover. Well, she's actually not on... Well, she is on the cover, but that's not the cute girl we're talking about exactly. And they're accompanied by their winged cat creature, Null, who annoys the fuck out of me 90% of the time, but that's fine. And so this is our main focus right here, is Alex, Luna, and Null. And their relationship, excluding Null, because getting freaky with a flying cat thing would be weird. The relationship between Alex and Luna, they grow up together, they're childhood friends. Luna doesn't have any parents, and she lives with Alex and their family, so there's, some things that are going on here. And what ends up happening is them and their friend Remus, I call him Remus, but Remus, who is this fat dude with glasses, brown hair, weird looking guy. They go off on an adventure to a cave with a dragon to get what's called a dragon diamond, so they can become rich and famous and so on and so forth. And that's how their adventure begins. And as they go on their quest for this stupid fuck diamond, they meet a dragon there known as the White Dragon Quark. And every time I say Quark, I vomit in my mouth a little bit, but I'll let it go. Again, this is an RPG that is as old as Final Fantasy IV. So this is a pretty old game. And I do think that Quark was kind of a dumb name for a dragon, but I looked past it. And they get the diamond, but Quark says something to Alex about his heroism and how he reminds him of Dragon Master Dyne, and tells that if he visits the other dragons, he can, go down that same path as Dyne, Dragon Master Dyne. I was gonna call him Lloyd, Dragon Master Dyne. So they go off on their quest, and throughout their quest, he meets the other heroes that fought alongside Dyne, Dragon Master Dyne, and he meets Alex meets Master Mel and Maribia when they find out they have to take the diamond literally overseas, right? To sell it, and they meet Master Mel there, one of the four heroes, inspires Alex even further to be the next Dragon Master, in a way. And they later go to the floating Magic City of Vane, where they meet the other two heroes. Well, you meet one of them, and you meet the other one a little later, but it's Galleon and Lemia. And so he meets these heroes, and what happens is when they sell the diamond off in Maribia, Alex and Luna go to the Magic City of Vane to learn more about the Dragon Master from Galleon and Lemia. So they go off and do that, and as they're going off and doing that, they find out through Galleon that they want to he wants to meet the White Dragon again and confirm something about the dragon and whatnot. And what ends up happening in this story is Galleon captures the White Dragon. He literally turns into Darth Vader, in a fantasy world setting, and literally kidnaps Luna, and yeah, shit goes fucking south. So obviously, as they go back, Galleon single-handedly uses a tribe of people who were banished to the frontier of Lunar, known as the Vile Tribe. He sends the Vile Tribe out to take out the other heroes from Dragon Master Dine's time. What ends up, the overall story is that Alex sets out to get the powers of the other dragons, including the armor and the equipment required to be the Dragon Master. And as he goes out and does all this stuff, he meets other people along the way. He meets Nash, who is this self-absorbed, narcissistic wizard of Vane, who is so self-absorbed he's kind of a douchebag. But he helps them in hopes that he'll get laid by his little girly friend, Mia, who offers to also help Alex in his quest to stop Galleon and the Vile Tribe. Well, also further along the way, they meet this priestess known as Jessica, who's the daughter of Mel, who was one of the four heroes, who's obviously raged out, pissed off because her father was turned to stone. And then her boyfriend, who's probably my favorite character, is Kyle, who's pretty much me in a loincloth with a big-ass fucking sword and a darker tan. And he has really nothing to gain from this other than getting some of Jessica's booty. So, and obviously he had some respect for Mel. So, then what ends up happening is you have these three relationships. You have the relationship between Alex and Luna, and obviously how Alex needs to save Luna because he's, in a sense, in love with her and truly loves her beyond just being friends. Ramus is not in the party anymore. Nash and Mia, who Nash really likes Mia, and Mia kind of likes Nash if Nash wasn't such a douchebag. And then Jessica and Kyle are pretty much me and one of my ex-girlfriends just literally raging at each other to the point where after they're done yelling at each other, they probably rip each other naked, they probably rape each other, and they just, and I do mean this, they probably rip the clothes off of each other and just have the sweatiest, raunchiest sex known to mankind off screen. Which I can live with, actually. And so anyway, they go out, they fight the Vile Tribe, which are just, I don't know what the difference is between the Vile Tribe and normal people. They look kind of the same to me as far as Zenobia and Fascia, and I forget the third one's name because it wasn't that important. And so, Royce was her name. Got it. So Alex sets off on a quest to deal with the dragons and so on and so forth. And you find out that Galleon's also in that same position. He's going out and taking out the dragons in order to power his doomsday machine known as the Grindery. And throughout this, so what makes this story so great? Well, the story in and itself, this love triangle that goes on between Alex and Luna and the other two groups of characters, it plays a lot of weight into it. It's not and without ruining too much of the story, because if you haven't played Lunar, I don't want to necessarily ruin the story for you, so I'm not going to talk about the deeper intricacies of the story from here. But what it does is it's a constantly flowing story, and it flows very well. Though I think the first time I went to Nanza, which is where uh, which is where Kyle is, I kind of got a little confused there. I think the first time I played, but once I got through it was fine. But you know, the gameplay and the story progress. The difficulty of the game progresses with the game very nicely. It's not, you know, at any point the game is never not a challenge at some level, unless you grind in an area, which the game doesn't really allow too much of that. So like one of the games where everything's really well balanced. It's not just a good story. This game in Silver Star Story Complete was practically completely voice cast. And this is a game that came out on PlayStation and Sega Saturn. It was in the mid 90s. So you have this game that was fully voice acted, that had decent voice actors, even though a lot of them are not renowned voice actors, even in anime standards. I think the guy who played Alex, I think, was a rock singer that they just said, "Hey, you want to do a voice acting thing?" And he did. And you know, John Truitt was the only voice actor I actually vividly remember from that game, because he played Galleon, and the Galleon voice acting was kind of good. Let's just say he's the voice actor who enjoyed every delicious morsel of what he was saying. He was a voice actor who wanted to be this role. He loved the idea that this was the character he got to be. He showed up to work every day with a big fucking grin on his face going, "I'm going to get to be the most evil son of a bitch of all time." And it shows in his acting. And though it is a little over the top, which in the American translation, which is obviously John Truitt, in the American translation, it fit perfectly to the style and the retelling that Working Designs, who was a conversion studio at the time, they rewrote and translated and redone all the dialogue to fit an American audience, did. So with that said and done, you had really good, interesting voice actors. Some of them were good, some of them were kind of bad. So it's a mixture of both. But the ones that were good were really good, and these were people who I don't recollect making huge careers out of voice acting. So it was neat to really hear some fresh voice acting for a change. But more importantly, the story in and itself is ridiculously good. And whether you play the Japanese version or the English version, they're very good. Now, the English version was, as far as what was written on the page, what was spoken and what was in the dialogue boxes, were very, 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 very different than what were in the Japanese ones. And we're going to talk about that now. And this applies to any of the not any of the American releases, but this specifically applies to Lunar, the Silver Star Story Complete, and Lunar 2 Eternal Blue Complete, which I haven't even talked about yet. Working Designs is a conversion I call it a conversion studio because they don't personally put out games. They take games that did well in Japan, they translate them to English, they update a lot of things for an English audience, including voice acting and certain sound effects and songs that need to be exchanged out for English ones and whatnot. And they re-release the game. Now, one of the things that Working Designs was notoriously famous for doing, and when I say notorious, it was because it was a good thing at times and it was a bad thing at times, which is why the company's not around anymore. Their translations. They took a lot of liberty in their translations. They added a lot of satire in their translations. Now, in Lunar, the Silver Star Story Complete, and Lunar 2 Eternal Blue, this works really, 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 really well. The satire and the way that the characters talk to each other is much more believable, than maybe a Final Fantasy RPG at that time, like in the early 90s. Even Final Fantasy 7 and 8 characters in those games talk to each other in ways normal human beings do not talk to each other. It's very mechanical. It's very overly grammarly perfect in certain respects, and there was no in many cases, especially in Final Fantasy VIII, there was no real personality. I mean, Final Fantasy VII, Barrett Wallace had a personality, and so did Lloyd, so did Sid, but Vincent, Cloud, Tifa, Ares, Sephiroth, even, you didn't always feel a lot of characteral difference between the way they talk to each other. In Lunar, when characters talk to each other, even in text boxes, when there's no voice acting, you can sense their personalities through the text box. Even if you played it on mute, you can, even if you muted the game from beginning to end, you can, in a sense, see the difference in personalities even through written dialogue, which in a video game is not easy to do. At least it was never done really well until, like today. And even today, it's not very good. So the characters are very unique in their personalities, and their personalities are wonderful to listen to. They're enjoyable. They're, and with the updated dialogue and the voice acting provided by Working Designs, the satire jokes and the satire that is in the game that was added to normally a very serious game was spot on. And it was loved and enjoyed by all people everywhere. It was wonderful. And Working Designs also provided like all these little things. When you bought the game, it didn't come in a regular PlayStation box. So when I saw it for the first time, I said, well, I have that game on Sega CD, so why would I want that? And I looked at it, it was like $30. And it had just come out, but I was buying it from a store called Warehouse, and they were just going out of business because they sucked at selling music, but they had a few video games, and they had Lunar, Silver Star Story, and so I saw it there for $30. It was on sale. It was normally a $70 game, and it was in a weird, like I said, it was in a weird cardboard box kind of shape with that looked like a PlayStation label, but whatever. And when I took it home and I opened it up, I mean, I knew these things were in there, but it was one thing to see it, read that it's in there. It's another thing to see it. It came with a leather-bound instruction manual with a bookmarker. It came with, oh god, I'm trying to think of what it came with. A map, I think, and it came with all this stuff. Okay, it came with a lot of stuff, and the stuff that it came with, it was like 2 game CDs. There was a music CD. There was a making of the game CD. There was this like cloth map of the world or something, and the leather-bound instruction manual. So this is a lot of shit. This is a lot of stuff. They pulled an Earthbound on me. So for those of you who know, when we bought Earthbound or Mother 2 in the US, it came in this fucking oversized box that came with the game manual and the game, or the game manual, the game, and the player's guide. Now, this wasn't a player's guide, but a leather-bound instruction manual. That's pretty cool. And what's interesting, too, it was also published by not just Working Designs, but it was published by Kodokawa Shoten. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't that Shoten Jump? But anyway, so the guys who produced Dragon Ball Z and Naruto and all that, I think they're technically the same company, and I'll double-check that, but I'm pretty sure. But anyway, so we have this game that is not just presented well visually. The music is by Noriyuki Awadari, and music is a huge thing in this game. From Luna singing the main themes, the music in itself, from very dark and very serious to light and fluffy. I can't really describe it what else, but it's light and fluffy to kind of some very energetic rock out kind of battle themes and danger themes and whatnot. So the music is good, and I said in another RPG Guy Talks, Noriyuki Awadari's music a lot of the time is at the same level as someone like Uematsu. And as many bad Uematsu soundtracks as there are some bad ones. And they both are about the same. For as many good ones as both of them have, they both have about the equal amount of bad ones. And the only problem with Awadari was he never got into game franchises that were at the same popularity as others, and they were on unpopular consoles. I mean, when your first big game that you wrote music for was on the Sega CD, you're not going to get heard of very quickly. So that's part of how that played out. So excuse me. So you have this game, Lunar: The Silver Star Story, that is just, it's a wonderful game from beginning to end. The battle system is not just a cliche Final Fantasy Dragon Quest style battle system. It actually has characters on one side, monsters on the other. You can place your characters wherever you want on that right side of the screen, and they have to walk a certain amount of distance to use a melee attack. and the enemies have to do the same thing. But how far they can move is based on your character's agility. So, you know, they'll move different distances. So it's a little bit of tactical thought has to be put into this game. So it's not just, you know, button, you know, menu item selection, attack, da 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 da. It's not just that. You have to consider distance, traveling ability, and who's going to move first. Mages, not so much. They just kind of, you put them in the very, very back, you know, or the very back corner even. You space them out. You put maybe, I would put Jessica, who was a priest, who had some melee capability, and it wasn't shit either. It was actually pretty good. You put her, I would make like an X. I put Alex and Kyle in the front, kinda, and then I put Jessica just a couple spaces behind them in the middle, and then I put my two casters in the back corners, and that's a good setup, you know. And there's your strategy right there. And this was the same kind of layout that comes in Lunar 2, so there's there wasn't much difference in that. So we had a very strong story. A very wonderful story of a young boy who goes off on a quest that's just amazing, with amazing music, with a unique, colorful battle system, well voice acted, well written. The dialogue is witty. It's clever. It's fun, even though there's a couple of modern kind of jokes thrown in there, and that is kind of out of character. It's not like it's breaking the fourth wall, but how would you know of these famous people that are not in your fantasy world? And from beginning to end, it's a wonderful story of love, of music, of a story of triumph and fighting over evil. And here's the one thing you can take home with you on this. It's one of the best RPG stories ever told, which is why it gets remade so much. You know, same reason why Final Fantasy IV gets remade so much. It's a solid story, and it's a wonderful story to get lost in, and a wonderful world.